4D, loan payments, credit cards, and mortgages. Loans are a little bit like annuity. In annuity that we talk about in 4C, we save up money, and at the end, we have a big pot of money that we saved up. In a loan, it's a little bit different. First, we receive a big pot of money, and then we try to pay it back throughout our payment. So you'll notice it's a combination. It's very similar to annuity, but annuity, the pot of money is in the future. But in the loan, we need the pot of money to be in the present. So if you combine the annuity formula that we learned in 4C with the compound interest formula in 4B, you will be able to come up with the loan payment formula that's listed over here. We're not going to show you how to get this in our course, but what we'll do is we will provide you with this formula on the test as well. You will, however, need to know what all the various symbols represent. Suppose we borrow some student loans, $30,000 at a rate of 9%. We need to pay this off over 10 years with monthly payments. In this case, the amount that we borrow is 30,000. That goes in the P part. That's the principal, the amount we borrow. APR is still the same. We change that to decimal form. We divide it by 100 to get to 0.09. We're making monthly payments, so N is 12. The loan is paid off over 10 years, so Y is 10. It's easiest, for me at least, to do each of the curvy brackets first, the braces first. So after you substitute in the numbers, let's go back to the last. It's a little bit easiest. It's easiest if you do these parts separately first. So that part will give me negative 120, 0.09 divided by 12. Let's do that in our calculator. That should be 0.0075. So this part over here will be 0.0075. And this part will be 1.0075. Now, if we look at the square brackets in the denominator, so right now we end up having 30,000 times 0.0075. And here we have a big bracket. 1 minus 1.0075 to the power of negative 120. The reason why I write this everything out in detail is because the steps that we do here is a little bit tricky. I recommend doing the brackets first in order to limit the mistakes you make. So 1 minus 1.0075. And now we need to do an exponent of negative 120. Now, you should try this in your calculator. And depending on your calculator, you have to put in the plus and minus sign, the negative sign at a different time. Now, for most calculator, the negative sign and the subtraction sign are different. You cannot use the subtraction sign in this case. For most calculator, the older version at least, you have to put in the number first, 120, before they allow you to add a negative sign to it. So just double checks to make sure you know which type of calculator you have. By doing that, you should be able to get to 0.592. And that's what you will see here, 0.59206. At the end, you simply take $30,000 times 0.075 divided by the 0.59206, and you get the payment of $380. And this is how we calculate the payments that you had to pay for any type of loan, for student loans, for car loans, for mortgages in your house. They are all done like this. Once again, we can use something. We can use the spreadsheet to do our calculation for us. So here we're going to call up our Microsoft Excel. And this is very similar to what we did before. We still use the payment function. And the rate over here is 9%. And we are doing the rate 12 times in a year. Right? We're doing 12 payment periods and 12 compounding periods. Here, the payment that we have is 12 times 10 years. And now the amount of money that we are going to put in is not the future value anymore. The loan is borrowed at the beginning, at the present, so that's the present value. There's no future values, and we don't have to put anything else in here. You'll notice by doing that, that will also give us the answer. That allows us to double check our answer really quickly. Now let's try to investigate a little bit investigate the loan in a little bit of detail. Suppose the monthly payment is 380.03. Well, how many of these payments do we have to make, right? How many of these payments do we have to make? We have to pay over 10 years, 12 months in each year, so the total number of payments is 120. Every single time we pay $380, so 380 per month times 120 months, that gives me 45,603.6. So we borrow 30,000, we have to repay a little bit more, which makes sense. We have to pay interest, right? And how much interest are we paying? We find the difference. 45,603.6 minus 30,000, how much we borrow, that's the amount of interest. And you can see it's quite a sizable amount of interest. We borrow 30,000, we have to pay roughly half the amount as interest. And in this case, roughly 1/3 of our payments are interest payments. And depending on the rate and depending on the year of your loan, the amount that we pay become interest payments will vary. Let's talk about credit cards. Credit cards are a little bit different in that most credit cards aren't structured like a loan. It doesn't require you to pay a certain amount each time. And the minimum monthly payment are usually quite low, And it takes a year, 2 years, 3 years to pay off your credit card loan if you only make the minimum payment. And the problem for most people is they'll pay the minimum payment and then they will keep using their credit card and they will max out their credit card really fast. And their credit card will stay maxed out. And you have to pay interest over and over again. And the loan doesn't get any smaller. So if you ever run into credit card problems, credit card debt problems, the most important thing that you have to do is you have to focus on making payments only and stop using your credit card to build up more debt. And you are only planning to pay off everything on your credit card and reset your finance before you decide what you want to do in the future. Let's look at a couple of examples. Let's say we have a credit card balance of $6,000 and the interest rate is 24%, 24% APR. Let's say we want to pay off the balance in 2 years. Let's say I'm not going to spend I'm not going to use my credit card, the credit card here, and we're only going to pay off the $6,000, and it's going to take us. We're going to take 2 years to do that. How much do we pay each month? So we use the same formula. And in this case, 2 years, we use 2 for y. We put everything in our calculator, and that gives me 317.23. And if we think about it, $317 every month, we had to make, if we were paying this over 2 years, we had to make 24 of these payments. So we ended up paying $7,613. We borrowed $6,000 and we ended up paying $7,600. Now, what if I want to pay off everything in 1 year? We can do the same calculation again, and we get 567.36. You'll notice if you want to pay off your loan faster, you had to pay a much larger amount, right? We're paying a larger amount to do this faster. And the advantage of doing this faster is that the total that you pay is a bit less. And it's a bit less because we're paying less interest. In fact, if you look at the amount that we're paying almost half of what we were paying before in interest. Here, the interest is 1,600 and a little bit more. Here, the interest is only 800 for a year. So in general, if you can pay off faster, that means you save on the interest payment, and your total payment is a little bit less because you have less interest. Finally, a note on the mortgages. Mortgages are what we use to buy a house, for example. And when we do that, when we buy a house or buy an apartment, we have to put down a down payment and we borrow the rest with a mortgage. Now, what you have to be careful of if you're thinking about buying your own place is that typically there is a lot of closing costs. And closing costs are things that fees that we have to pay at the end. So for example, the banks, to help you set up mortgages, they might charge a little bit extra as fees, as closing costs. If you buy a house in Canada and you don't have enough down payment, you have to buy insurance. You have to buy something called mortgage insurance, so that the bank is willing to lend money to you. That costs extra. If you buy a house, you might want to hire an inspector to check the house. That's extra money. You need to hire a lawyer or notary to make sure that the title is correct and the title is transferred onto you. You might also need to pay for any renovations that you have to do before you move in. And finally, in British Columbia, every time you purchase a property, you have to pay something called land transfer tax. So you have to pay tax to the government every time you buy a place. So in this particular case, the land transfer tax for most houses, most places in Vancouver, they're somewhere over $200,000. They are a lot over $200,000. They will come to 2% of your property value. So if you buy a place for $2 million, you have to pay $20,000 in property transfer tax. So now you know why real estate is so hot. there's a lot of people who stands to make money off the buyer, right? The bank made money on the mortgage. There are lawyers involved, realtor involved. The government get tax money. Everybody gets a piece in the pie. So that's why it's sort of it's very dangerous and it's very common for everyone to promote real estate to get more buyer and to get the price to go up so everybody can make more. Let's look at how closing costs work in real life. Suppose a bank gives you a mortgage, $100,000, 30 years at 5%. Now it has a closing cost. You have to pay the bank $500 plus 1 point. Here, the 1 point refers to 1% of your mortgage. So if your mortgage is $100,000, 1 point is $1,000. Big bank offers a lower rate, but the closing cost is more. It's $1,000 plus 2 points. So 2% of the 100,000. We can do the calculation that we've been doing to find the loan amount, to find the payment amount. It's just the same calculation. And for the case of Great Bank, we get 536.82 if we pay it back at 5% interest rate. For the big bank, for the other one, the rate is lower, 4.75, and therefore the payment is less because the interest rate is low. So comparing the two banks, the amount that we pay every month is a little bit cheaper by about $15. But of course, there's a difference in the closing cost. Big bank has a closing cost of 500 plus 1%. Big bank is a little bit more, 2% plus 1,000. So while big bank costs less, costs $15 less every month, it costs more at the beginning to set everything up. And we can actually see that it takes about 100 months. It takes 8 years and a little bit to have the lower monthly payment be worth it, right? Be worth it. And a lot of times people will have to people sell their houses, they move, or they change the company that they do mortgage with in less than 8 years. So you have to compare and think about whether you'll be staying in the house and holding that mortgage in order to make the bigger closing cost at the beginning, but a cheaper payment be worth it. One final word. When we have a long amortization years, like a mortgage loan that take place over 30 years, what you'll notice is this: the payment for $100,000, a 30-year loan at 5% is about $734. So we'll pay $734 all throughout the 30 years every month. And what happens is at the beginning, we owe $100,000. So most of the money that we pay are interest. And we only pay down a little bit of the loan. So after we cover interest, we only pay down a little bit. So we can only pretty much return the bank, a few $100s. Not even a few $100s. This is more like $50. And it would take us many years before the loan gets reduced and reduced and reduced, and more of our money goes into interest. More of our money goes into the principal payment that we paid $100,000. And if you look at the relative proportion of these two colors, hopefully you'll notice that the blue is a lot bigger, right? The blue part is a little bit bigger. So over 30 years, if you have a loan for over 30 years, you have to pay a lot of interest, more interest than the 100,000 that we pay back, right? The red part over here is the 100,000. And you'll notice the blue part looks like it's bigger, and it looks like we're paying more than 100,000 worth of interest. And this is what happens if you borrow a large amount of money over a long period of time. You're really just helping the bank by paying them interest.